In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, these brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Brian Fry, Chad Robinson, Dustin Melbardis, Lizzy Hayness, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
Welcome, all you lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable, where we watch movies and then talk about them. I'm your host, Dustin Melbardis, and joining me today is my good friend and co-host, Lizzy Hayness. Lizzy, what's the Olympic event you're excited for?
I mean, it's the year of Simone Biles. I think that is there anything else actually going on this year?
I've been watching some women's rugby. It's an incredible time of the year. We're excited for it. We've got a guest. This is not an Olympic-sized movie. This is sort of a throwback to the 80s. From Austin, Texas, returning to the show, this is Matt Kerker. Say hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
You have Olympic fever right now?
A little bit, yeah. Speaking of Simone Biles, my wife was in gymnastics for all of high school and part of college, so she's been very excited to watch it. She always gets the most hyped for all of the Olympic team, the men's and the women's, when it comes to gymnastics.
Well, we aren't talking about the Olympics tonight, but we've got a very particular movie, and I'm going to ask you a warm-up question. We'll start with you, Matt. What is your favorite movie beard? Doesn't have to be a real beard, but why?
It's got to be Pai Mei's beard from Kill Bill. It's over the top. It's
a good one.
Wild. It complements the rest of his character's face, and it's used as a physical prop. It's a goated beard. It's really carrying a lot of the weight of his character.
It's a goated beard. Yeah, I can't believe I didn't choose that myself. It is really good. Might get in the way of Kung Fu for somebody not quite the skill of a master as Pai Mei. Lizzy, what's your answer here? Best movie beard?
I went with Captain Jack Sparrow. His facial hair. It's like the first beard that I actually, besides like Gandalf, which feels like low-hanging fruit, but I think that I just like the beads and the braids. It just felt so recognizable to me that I couldn't help myself.
It is pretty iconic.
It is an iconic beard.
I have no idea how old I was when those kids, like early aughts, when the first one came out.
Yeah.
So I really didn't notice facial hair probably up until that point.
If you're going to go with the Pirates of the Caribbean beard, how do you not go with the squid tentacle beard of Davy Jones?
Ooh, I didn't think about that one. I guess I was thinking about real facial hair, and I didn't think about the addendum that it didn't have to be an actual beard.
I like how you're just like kind of clapping back at me like, oh, I didn't know we were allowed to break the rules.
No. I just forgot that wasn't like just like a CGI beard. So I wasn't really thinking, but that is true. That's way more elite than Captain Jack's.
But as we all know, Johnny Depp did fully grow all of that facial hair and had it for years. So.
And It kind of took over his personality too, which is why I guess that's a pretty good deal. Well, speaking of taking over personalities, I came to my decision really fast, and I kind of hated it. The beard I thought of first was Leonidas in 300. And I wanted to ask, is that a terrible answer? And the reason I want to ask if it's a terrible answer, because I feel like that may have been the turning point towards a new 20-year-long change in like what masculinity is.
Yeah, I feel like it felt like the new standard. It really kind of created this wave of, because before that, clean shaven was really the way to go. Like you kind of associated big beards with almost being unkept. And now it's totally different. Like it was only during No Shave November that you had a beard. And now like when my husband shaves, it's jarring. It's like he's like a different person, and I only want him with a beard. So I think it's a good one. It changed the course of pop culture.
I will say I saw an ad on the internet that said, "If you're dating a man without a beard, you're dating a woman." Like, what a nasty, what a nasty way to look at it.
I don't know.
Yeah. is just that this is what defines being a man. Hey, I love a good beard, and I think the reason I chose it was because it fits so well with the helmet of like the Spartan helmet. With the beard sticking out like it's seen in like vases and ancient artwork. So I thought that was kind of cool that they recreate it, and everybody in the movie has a beard like it. But yeah, I definitely thought to myself, maybe I'm the worst kind of guy for choosing it. Well, we'll get back to why we chose beards here in just a second, but I've got another question here for you, Matt. What's the last movie that you saw?
The last movie I saw was Dune Part 2.
Were you like hype for this?
I was very hyped for it, and one of the reasons I was very hyped for it is because I watched it with a friend who wanted me there because he knew that I had read all the books many times, and he wanted to see my reaction. So it was his like third time watching it, my first. And he wanted to know my takes on it and how I felt about some of the choices that they made when it came to kind of plot points and stuff, deviating from the novels.
Yeah, that makes sense for us. One of our co-hosts, Brian Fry, and his brother, big Dune heads, excited to see what Villeneuve would do for it. But I did watch a 2024 movie recently, and that is way out of left field for me, called The Beekeeper, starring Jason Statham, your favorite, Lizzy.
Yeah. Did you like it?
No. This movie was no good. This movie had the things you might expect from it. I remember thinking that the transporter changed cinema. I was also a little boy. I think we're kind of done with this, but there's still a cash grab. And this movie was successful. They try to wrap up some kind of description as to the beekeepers being some kind of secret government agency, and boy, do they try to nail it home, and it just doesn't work. Did you know of The Beekeeper before I brought it up, Lizzy?
Yes, because my mom has recommended that movie to me like 5 times, and that is not my mom's genre. Like,
really?
She is not an action girly, and she's like, this movie that I saw, and she keeps telling me about it, and I'm like, Mom, I'm not the one. Like, I'm not gonna watch a Jason Statham movie. It's just not for me. But it cracks me up that my mom is really into it. She loved it. So, shout out to Nancy.
And now you have the decision of who to trust, Nancy or Dustin. Probably
I'm
Nancy.
Gonna trust you on this one. I don't need to waste my time with Jason Statham.
Yeah, just off of that brief description of trying to nail the beekeepers as a secret society already doesn't sound great. But I'm of the strong opinion that it's all been downhill since Crank 2 High Voltage for Mr. Statham.
Lizzy famously loves the Crank movies. We're going to move past the Olympics. We're going to move past Crank, but we aren't going to move past beards because, Lizzy, what are we covering tonight?
We are watching Yellowbeard.
From 1983, starring Graham Chapman, Peter Boyle, Cheech and Chong, Peter Cook, Marty Feldman, Martin Hewitt, Michael Hordern, Eric Idle, Madeline Kahn, James Mason, and John Cleese. Yeah, we don't always list all the names. This is a star-studded cast. Released in 83, budget of $10 million. It only grossed $4.3 million domestically, placing it 107th in the box office that year. That means it placed just behind Trenchcoat and just above The Keep, 2 movies I'd never heard of. Number 1 movie that year, surprising nobody, Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. That is just completely leagues different from anything in the triple digits at the box office. We expect that. IMDb rating of Yellowbeard, 5.9. Okay. Middle of the road, you might think. Critics' tomato meter, 22%. All right, now we're starting to get an idea as to what this thing is. Audience score, 63%. Now I looked over to our guest, and he just kind of nodded his head, and I'm thinking, so this movie is for someone. And we are going to try to get to the bottom of it. AFI distinctions, none. And how many awards did it win? That's also none. But it had a lot of people in it. This movie was brought to us by our guest of Short List, and Yellowbeard is what we decided to go with. One of the reasons we decided to go with it was because when I did a search of Yellowbeard review on YouTube, the very first option that I got that was somebody reviewing this movie had 16 views. So I said, this movie is ripe for us to cover. So, Matt, had you seen Yellowbeard before?
Yes, I've seen Yellowbeard many times before. It was kind of a staple rotation in our household among other Mel Brooks films and Monty Python films. I will say the topic of it and the introduction of it to me was not broached until I finally kind of asked my parents, because they would quote the films from times at me, mainly when my father threatened me, saying that he would make me eat my own lips, where I finally had to ask, where is that from? And that broke the Yellowbeard seal.
Yeah. And so presenting it to this show, did you have different expectations when you watched it in preparation here? It's a big inhale, folks, because when we're talking about expectations for this movie, especially when you introduce it to people, I imagine that a lot of stuff goes through your head.
I did not expect it to be reviewed favorably. I felt the reason I wanted to throw it into the running is because I feel like there's a lot to discuss when it comes to the movie. But as a collective understanding of it, my impression was, yeah, this probably isn't going to go over well, because I don't think that the movie is very ambitious in what it's trying to do, and I think it misses the mark on multiple fronts. But we can kind of get into more of that later.
Yeah, let me throw it over to you, Lizzy. Had you seen Yellowbeard before?
No, I'd never even heard of it before. This was a first on all levels for me. I IMDb'd the movie. I didn't look at the rating, but I read the 2 or 3 sentence summary. And so that just at least gave me enough to know that this movie was going to be about pirates. And I saw the cast, kind of knew that it was going to be somewhere in the Monty Python, Mel Brooks vein of satire.
Sure.
So I had pretty high expectations. Wolf. I think I'm not gonna lie, this was a hard movie to get through, but I really appreciate the cast and I appreciate what they tried to do, but I agree that they just missed it.
I think we were talking before the show, and you mentioned that you had kind of grown up with Monty Python, the Holy Grail, and Robin Hood, Men in Tights, and I think that the easiest kind of comparisons are the things that we have found extremely successful from that era and that genre. Monty Python, number one, Mel Brooks, number one. And then we think about other things that attempt that style. And in general, there are parents or there are people that kind of falls into like their oeuvre, like this is what they want. I have described before, when we covered, I think 2 years ago, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, that I don't really remember what my sense of humor was before being introduced to that movie. And I know now that a lot of who I am, to the detriment of the people that have to interact with me all the time, is to an absurdist, goofy British humor level of, can I put someone on edge a little bit? Can I confuse them for 5 seconds before we reach an internal punchline in my own head? And how pleasant is that for people to be around? Well, they'll tolerate me for as long as they can. But these are the kind of things where, you watch Flying Circus, or you think about little tropes that kind of fall into Mel Brooks style, or a little tongue-in-cheek. We know that we just did the joke, and we did too. And sometimes that might even have a breaking of the fourth wall, looking to camera like, yeah, we did that. Airplane. With there's so many things that fall into that. And the reason I bring it up is that I think that if we think about this movie with those expectations, it would be hard for anything to really keep up with that. So I guess I'll kick it back to you, Lizzy. You mentioned that you read the IMDb synopsis, like the quick little blurb. I happen to still have the movie blurb up on my TV across the room, and it says, a spoof swashbuckler in which a villainous pirate makes an effort to locate a treasure he buried years earlier. Lizzy, that just kind of sounds like, hey, we're going to have some fun. We're going to have some pirates. Yeah. And we'll get to the topic of pirates again. But for myself, I also had never seen it. But I had, with my dad in particular, he introduced things to me that he felt I should see. I think he also did this at the wrong time, generally way too young for me to experience these movies. I think I was 11 when I watched Reservoir Dogs. I think I was 12 when I watched Pulp Fiction. Repo Man was 12 years old. Like, there's just a bunch of stuff that I was introduced to early. And ladies and gentlemen, you got me now. And so this is something where I'm sitting on the couch and I have an idea of what this is. Mainly the cast list gave me an idea of what this was going to be. And I shifted. I hit a couple of switches in my motherboard to say, let's enjoy this. And I succeeded in enjoying it, but I had to work hard. My brain had to work hard to say, let me pick out the things that I'm really liking. And I fell and faltered a bit during watching, thinking, oh, this is a little bit of a mess, or is this... I started looking up that some of these actors were regretting some of the time they spent on this movie. We'll get to it. I think we kind of set up that this is mercurial. How do we cover a movie like this? And we'll get into it, but we're going to do it after the break. If you have not watched Yellowbeard from 1983 and you're listening to this episode, go watch it right now. Come back, because when we come back, Lizzy's going to give a plot summary. And you don't want a plot of a raucous pirate adventure spoiled for you. So when we come back, we're going to tell you all about Yellowbeard.
Welcome to the All 80s Movies Podcast.
I'm Bill.
And I'm Jason. And this is the podcast where we talk about the blockbusters, the flops, and everything in between from one of the freshest decades for movies, the 1980s. So whether you're a brain, a jock, a valley girl, or a Jedi, we've got some 80s classics for you.
Do these movies stand the test of time? Are we discovering something new? Is there an 80s movie we're finally watching for the first time?
Join us each week as we dive into the cinematic nostalgia that inspired and influenced a generation. From the hits to the cult classics, we'll discuss our earliest memories, favorite scenes, fun facts, and our not-so-favorite movie moments too.
It's the All 80s Movies Podcast, now available on all major streaming platforms. Please subscribe and happy listening.
And we are back. And this is your final warning. We are about to spoil the plot of 1983's Yellowbeard. So if you haven't watched it, go watch it. Lizzy, take it away.
Yellowbeard is reaching the end of his 20-year sentence after acquiring a massive Spanish treasure while making an enemy of his longtime partner, Moon. Upon his release, he is met by his wife, who informs him that he not only has a son, but he is a refined gentleman, and that the only remaining map is tattooed on his head. While Yellowbeard is horrified to learn this news, Dan, Yellowbeard's son, is excited at the prospect of having a vicious pirate as a father. The race is on for the treasure as the Queen's Guard sail off along with Moon, Dan, and Yellowbeard stowed away below the deck. They reach their destination to find El Nebuloso, who's built a torture chamber completed with its own pool of acid. The pirates attack, and Nebuloso meets his death in his own acid pit. Finally, after 20 years, Moon and Yellowbeard have their long-awaited battle, with Moon succumbing to the same fate. After some stammering, they find the treasure, but not before being ambushed by the Queen's Guard. Dan, once a refined intellectual, is now battling with his identity since learning of his true father. It's in this moment that Dan steps into his father's shoes and becomes a pirate.
What a way to put it. That Dan is battling with like his idea of what it is to like live up to his father. There are some things in this movie that you can tell, and just listening to your plot summary, Lizzy, I think to myself, we have pieces, don't we? We have a pirate movie on our hands. We have a long lost treasure. We have a powerful villainous Yellowbeard who has a family. We have the Queen's Guard. What did you say? The Queen's Secret Service.
Yes.
A little tongue-in-cheek kind of nod. Little jokes like this, I think, are going to save our discussion tonight, because there's little funny quips in here that are just even no matter how tangentially they are related to the plot. There's still plenty of opportunities for fun, and so it makes me just think about this plot that goes on. And a pirate movie and swashbuckling, we have it. and beautiful sets on the ocean. We have it. And there's just things that are pieces. But I think it might be best for us to maybe start with what we think about this movie that goes wrong. And I think it's important for us to do this now so that we can always come back to it. Because in our in our little talk before the ad break, in our talk before the show began, we all kind of came to the decision that, like, we're scratching our head. Is this movie any good? Matt, tell me a little bit about the way that this movie fails, or how the space between its good pieces are maybe letting us down.
Well, I think just kind of from that summary, you could start to get an impression of it's very ambitious in a lot of different directions, and I don't think really gives us a satisfying conclusion of any of them. I think a lot of the Spanish El Nebuloso stuff was shoehorned in at the end of the film.
Sure. Let's just focus on that for just one moment. Lizzy, with El Nebuloso and the Spanish presence here, very, very beginning, 2 minutes worth, and then the last 15 to 20 minutes, we've got a faction, the Spanish, that it does kind of seem like a portion of this, where did it come from? Did you find yourself at all attached to the Spanish side with our Cheech and Chong characters?
No, not at all. I mean, to be honest, it took me a minute to put two and two together that everybody was the same. And it could have, to me, it was totally interchangeable. Like whoever, now to be fair, I think that the humor that Cheech and Chong brought was a little bit of a saving grace. Like I think that they brought some silliness to the movie that I think the movie desperately needed. But I think that but in terms of like the actual meat of what they were able to bring to the characters and like the development of their roles, I think that there was like that part of the story. It's just like they wrote it in just to have Cheech and Chong in the movie. That's what I think.
Yeah. I think it was something I mentioned to Dustin. It's like, is this some screenwriter's axiom that I wasn't aware of? Like Chekhov's Spaniards, where, okay, we introduce them at the beginning of the film, so we must bring them back at the end. They did feel very out of place. I do agree. I liked the humor that they injected, particularly Cheech.
As El Segundo.
Agreed. Yeah.
I think was carrying a lot of the duo when it came to their comedic scenes.
I would say with Cheech and Chong in general, and because I didn't grow up with them, I think Matt, you said your parents or your dad liked Cheech and Chong. My dad told me about Cheech and Chong, but I remember, I think, watching Up in Smoke and not getting a single bit. And I think that for like the just sheer energy, generally it's Cheech's fast energy that it is fun, and Tommy Chong, before I even knew about drug use, it had always been a little toned down. So we've got Chong playing this El Nebuloso, who is, and I was a little tongue in cheek talking about not wanting this plot spoiled for you. I don't even exactly know what he is. He is part of like a Spanish backed sailing force at one point, who is counting gold and saying, I'm the richest man in the world. Then he adds another piece of treasure to the pot. Oh, now I'm the richest man in the world again. And then later on, when we catch up with him an hour and 10 minutes in, he's running a hedonistic island with a harem around him. And
it's like a Bond villain.
Maybe, yeah, very much like a Bond villain. This is the Bond villain's lair, where they live, I guess, in isolation and I guess relative satisfaction with whatever their world is. Definitely something that zags you away, because, and I wanted to focus on that little bit of weird zag away, because I think we do have something positive that this shines a light on from the other side of the room, which is that we're invested in getting to this treasure one way or the other. Whoever we are following to find it is part of the fun. And I think that is what fits into a pirate movie, is that we do want to find the treasure. So Cheech and Chong It's what a weird sentence. Cheech and Chong's involved notwithstanding. is we know that the treasure is somewhere, and we get to follow this cast to find it. I think that's a positive thing about the movie, is that we get to go along for a journey.
Yeah. I think on that note, though, and kind of circling back to, what this movie was trying to do and maybe where its pitfalls were, I think it really struggled with its identity. Was it going to be just like a pure satire? Was it going to be a swashbuckling adventure? I think it tried to reach for both and failed to grasp either.
Yeah, I think with satires, it's hard because, I guess giving an example of ones that have done it very well, like Robin Hood Men in Tights would be a good example, where that is very much an adventure movie that's wrapped in satire. And, like Robin Hood saving everybody and his merry men and all the things. And I think, but with comedy in particular, with satire, there's like two different types of comedy. You have like your silly comedy, and kind of pulling back in with like Robin Hood Men in Tights, it would be like, the sequences of all the men, like we're men in tights and like things like that. And like all the little jokes with latrine. But then there's also like kind of, I hate to call it this, but like stupid humor that can happen in any comedic movie, which to me, like your like fart, burp, bodily fluid jokes, like all kind of fall into this umbrella of like stupid humor, which like we all laugh at it. It's also low-hanging fruit. And I think that the problem with this movie is that the ratio was off for me. Like, I think that they didn't have enough silliness to, it felt like they just went for whatever was going to be the closest gotcha. And it didn't have enough heart. And it just was not silly enough. Like, that's the difference to me between scary movie and adventure movie. Is, Scary Movie has a lot of silliness and sophistication in its humor, along with all the stupid stuff. Whereas like the adventure movies, like the farther down you go, it just becomes like just fully stupid, and it's almost unwatchable at that point.
Yeah. And I kind of want to tie it back, since you brought up Men in Tights. That was probably my second most watch of these comedic films growing up. And I think what helps it so much as a satire is that is an established story. We know the story of Robin Hood. We know the characters. We kind of know what's going to happen. And so the satire within it works better because you have a better understanding of what it's making fun of.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Pirate Story is so much more generalized. There's not a specific story or a specific set of tropes that I think Yellowbeard is attempting to exploit and satirize, or if they were trying to, they missed the mark.
It's like a lack of specific source material did not allow them to narrow their focus enough to spend more time in the writer's room making this funnier.
Yeah.
Now, Lizzy, we have to make a little concession because our showrunner, Russell, is such a comedy head that if he heard you say, well, there's two types of comedy, he would probably have his head spin. I'm not going to pretend. I'm not going to pretend to know how all the comedy things work together.
Specifically with satire, Russell. It's not like this. Like I don't know all the rest.
Russell, turn the car around and go home.
Please don't come knocking at my door.
Lizzy, I heard you were trying to categorize comedy. Well, that's not what we're trying to do. And but that's a good point. I didn't think of is that I think in general we have ideas about what a pirate story can be. And there's a chance that this movie introduces some things that are new to a pirate story, or some things that are new to a naval story. But any of that novel introduction is potentially overridden by the rest of the movie, because it is a comedy, no doubt, that the rest of the comedy not hitting that level that we had wanted. And I think that's kind of based on our expectation. Now, speaking of parody movies, I think we hit the ones that came to my mind first, but there was also one, Hot Shots and Hot Shots Part 2. Those were spoof action movies. And I had those in high regard for a while. They came out about 8 to 10 years after this. And then there was something that we were discussing weeks ago before we recorded, which was I think about a really, really successful, potentially the most successful, based on it being a franchise, would be Austin Powers.
Yes.
A combo of a lot of different type of humor, very much knows what they're doing, being cheeky with some of the stuff that they're showing you and being unapologetic about it. I'm going to say this movie is unapologetic about stuff that it should probably be apologetic about. And that's where I think to myself, it's okay that this isn't successfully tying into some famous pirate story. In the end, we have almost a rat race. We have some kind of like different factions all trying to get the same thing. And I think that's kind of neat, is that if we focus on our pirates, so we have Yellowbeard and his wife, Betty, who runs the tavern.
Yes.
There's some other pirates that matter. Moon, played by Peter Boyle, who is the one who betrayed him from long ago, who now has a hook hand. We have Marty Feldman's character, Gilbert. So these are some of our pirate characters. I think pirate adjacent would be our blind man character,
Blind Pew,
played by John Cleese. I think a standout, a kind of character in this movie. In fact, speaking of like a standout, let's think about it. Matt, with Blind Pew, we've got ourselves a character who's not in the movie enough to be considered even. Maybe he's on the edge of supporting. But Blind Pew, is this someone who is like, okay, I have a. It's not a pirate trope. It's like, you're a unique pirate. You deserve my attention for a little bit. I think that performance delivers.
Absolutely. And I think maybe part of it delivering is because it's kind of not trying to play into any particular trope. Also, just because I think Cleese kills it. I think he does a really good job in a lot of the roles that he plays. And he ends up being a fun character to follow around. He has a little bit of mystery to him. He advances the plot in various ways. Yeah, it would have been nice to get some more screen time out of him, to be honest.
Yeah, but I guess to show that our other pirate characters are capable, they do dispatch him. This is a guy who, Lizzy, it might. Did you just watch it once?
I did. Yeah, just once.
I watched it like 1.5 times. And I thought to myself, like, wait a second, when was it that Pew went away? And I realized that there's a moment where his cover is blown, and Marty Feldman's character like kind of reveals he's working with the government, and he in a moment of quick thinking and also just kind of a take the reins kind of action sense. He convinces all the pirates to shut the doors, close the curtains, turn off all the lights, and then in I would say, strangely enough, a masterful work of filmmaking, he pulls his very small little rapier, cuts the wick off of a candle, and in a room where everyone was relying on the light, the blind man is king. And he really takes out this crew of rowdy pirates. It's something where, and audience, I hope you're not keying in on me trying my hardest to find something positive. But the idea, that was cool. And that is not something I had seen in a pirate story before. But the idea is pirates all give us an opportunity to have their own little personalities. And this one was kind of like a blind badass. Didn't know John Cleese had it in him.
Yeah, not John Cleese. Blind Pew walked so Arya Stark could run.
There you go. There was.
She cuts the wick off when she's in Bravos, I think. Spoiler alert for Game of Thrones.
There are other. If we're going to talk about is this potentially the beginning of something? If you've watched John Wick 4, Donnie Yen's character is a blind swordsman.
There you go.
This is shot incredible. Do we have
never have
it
if not for Blind Pew?
Do we have Yellowbeard to thank for this?
If that's the only positive that came out.
Well, you know what, Lizzy, I'm certain that you can find others because I was just briefly mentioning some characters, but I would say that if we do agree that this movie's a little bit of a mess and failing to hit the mark of what some of these other successful spoof movies do for a bunch of reasons, that our individual performances are not entirely to blame. Who else here, let's go past Cheech and Chong, who else here in this movie, no matter how small the role, is someone that something that you would think, oh, that was kind of a fun aspect of this?
I loved Yellowbeard's wife. I think she was able to bring some color to the film in a lot of ways, being able to, and I think that there's like some uncomfortable scenes between her and Yellowbeard, and she brings a lot of just like comedic. She has this like vivacious aspect to her personality that's really makes some of those scenes like somewhat forgivable. And but then I love how she's also kind of working as a double agent, and like kind of her storyline of like being like out on the deck. And I honestly love her just because of, she's the bride of Frankenstein and young Frankenstein. So for me, I would see her on the screen. And same with Gilbert. Yeah. I mean, our Gilbert is Igor, and he honestly, his just facial expressions bring so much to the table. So I agree. To me, I don't look at this movie and feel like it is a flop due to the actors. I think that honestly, if it weren't for the cast and for their talent, I think this movie would be completely unwatchable. But they are the saving grace of this movie for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. The household I grew up in sang the praises of Madeline Kahn left, right, and center. She was one of my favorite parts of the movie. And her character, Betty, is kind of one of the smartest characters of the film.
There we go.
Yeah.
She sets up the whole tattoo on the head and getting rid of the map, like that's a major plot point. She's kind of playing with the British intelligence. She's lying cleverly to get to the places where she wants to get.
And she does know what she wants, which is a cut of the treasure.
Yeah.
Which does at least have, as far spread as this movie wants to take you, we do have a focal point at the end, no matter how much El Segundo and El Nebuloso try to detract from it, including Nebuloso's daughter Triola in it for.
She's funny. Yeah.
As far as that distracts, I mean, hey, that's for what that role is supposed to be. I mentioned it a bunch. Not every movie is made better with romantic love, and this movie spoofs that very well.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
You don't need a heroine. Our heroine here is Betty, and it's fun to have her along the ride. I was introduced to Madeline Kahn in Clue as Mrs. White. Everything she's in is dynamite, and at least her in the role makes it better. And there was a trope that me and Matt were talking about where there is a British humor thing where somebody will observe something in the scene and ask the obvious question, what happened here? She responds, "The plague." An obvious lie. A fun little lie. Well, that man's got a sword in him. Like, oh yeah, he does kind of have a little bit of sword in him.
Oh yeah, he fell. I mean, that's
he fell on it.
Yes, and I mean another example, and one of my favorite lines from the film is when they come into the bar after Pew has killed everyone, and they go like, "What happened here?" And it's like, "Oh, there's a bit of a squabble," and they're like, "Everyone's dead," and he goes, "Well, more of the tiff." I guess. Yeah.
This happens also again with her, where our Commander Clement, I guess, being British, comes in to ask, like, has Yellowbeard been here? No. Well, here's his clothes. Well, somebody came in here. There's this trope where of immediately lying about what's face value in the room, and then once being provided the slightest shred of evidence to immediately change course and go with the truth instead of the lie. And it's never punished. It's not really punished in the flying circus sketches. It's not punished here. As long as they get the truth eventually, it's kind of funny. And sometimes you get the truth by employing Ensign David Bowie with a shark fin on his back.
Yes.
Love the Bowie cameo.
We don't have to keep this in, but my dad's all-time favorite story to tell about me in my childhood was he was getting ready to, my mom was out of town, he was home, and I went to a party and I had an 11 o'clock curfew and everybody wanted to go to this other party. And my friend was supposed to be staying, she told her mom we were spending the night together. I went home because I knew my dad was waiting for me, in the exact chair that he sits in when he waits for me to come home. And she decided to stay out. And somebody called her mom and ratted her out. And so I knew at some point her mom was going to call me. She calls, I pick up, and she's like, put so-and-so on the phone. I'm like, she's sleeping. She's sleeping. Wake her up. And I'm just like, okay, well, here's the thing. She's not here.
Yes, that's funny.
It's my dad's favorite story to tell because I immediately panicked and just was like, yeah, she's not here. I can't fight it anymore. I don't have anything to say. She's gone.
Well, it's both are funny. Is the immediate recourse from the lie, or the complete devotion to the lie in the face of everything pointing against it. I think of the Black Knight.
Right. Yeah.
Your arms off.
The mounting absurdity. Yeah.
And I love that you brought it up. Is the mounting absurdities? I feel like we have a lot of examples of absurd things in this movie that for me, the culmination of our large action sequence at the end it begins with something that is absurd, which everyone seems to be trying to outsmart each other, which is a great premise to take. It's a piece that works. We're gonna be smarter than whoever it is that's coming against us. And so the smart move is we're gonna tell our Spanish priest fighters to pretend like they're dead. And that's something where I go, this is new to me. It's fun and it's absurd. Now, I think as far as absurdity and comedy, while they go together so frequently, they can't. It can sometimes just be oh, well, here we go, another hijinks thing.
I did appreciate the idea that I don't know if this was intentional or not, but I assume it was. There's this shtick that Yellowbeard is hiding away in below the deck and that nobody actually knows that he's there, even though he's constantly coming up that. I thought that part was funny. It was this idea when they get into a fight, he throws the captain overboard and pulls the ship into a different direction. And when everybody's fighting, he gets up and and then kills a bunch of other pirates. And then even he throws off one of the commanders with pinching his nose. And then he even goes as far when they see the island to jump out in front of the ship and start swimming, which 100% you would see. So I did appreciate that little constant inside joke of everybody, nobody knows.
Yeah. Well,
eventually, wait, what?
They even pointed out at some point where Lamhorn is oh, can alcohol make you see things?
That's what I was thinking.
Yes.
And the doctor's yeah, and he's oh, okay, well, that explains it.
That
and then
explains,
they just yeah.
Well, I actually think I'd go so far as to say they don't leave it. That is I have to think to myself that Graham Chapman here in writing and with the writer's room that they figure out that they might have had the audience thinking they would go one way, because we all clearly see Yellowbeard climbing across the window. And he says, can rum or can spirits, make you see things? I suppose, yes. And he turns out because, I imagined I saw an island then. They zag us because you think they're going to, I just saw Yellowbeard cross here. But no, he's talking about the island in the distance. So it gets us to the island. And once again, we're focused on getting to this island, which is kind of good. I'm thinking to myself that there are other silly things through this movie. I enjoyed all of the titles that they give to El Nebuloso, specifically from his little henchman. Your severity, your blizzard of the wrong, your most outrageousness, your acute horrendousness, right? These aren't bad jokes in their own right, but also that character who calls him these things has no impact on the movie at all. And it's a part of the situation that has kind of no impact at all, where we're kind of just excited to get to this treasure. Well, Matt, if you're watching this for the first time, who are we rooting for to get the treasure? Are we kind of putting our horses behind Dan?
I think that's kind of one of the struggles with the movie is the character that you're supposed to root for, and really that trio who are kind of our principal protagonists, I guess, are the least charismatic characters in the film. It's hard to root for them. The only one that I liked was Lamhorn, mainly just for his kind of drunken, rambling little quips, like little small little things that were funny and kind of throwaway lines. The doctor character, completely forgettable. I truly think the only line in the film of his that I got any enjoyment from is going back to that when they see the island and he says it's like, oh, it reminds me of a mirage that I saw if I saw it, which is, it's its own little self-contained absurdity there. That's it. Dan is
milquetoast.
Yeah. Which amusingly enough, Sting was considered for that role. And I think it would have been better. I believe the rumor, at least, was that they declined having Sting because they were worried that it was going to get too British when it came to the identity of the comedy of the film.
Well, we've done quite a few British movies over the last calendar year. And there are times when British drama, British comedy, and British studios, you kind of give deference to what they're going for, but it's not always for our audience here in the States. Maybe it's appropriate to understand that some of the failings of this movie were them trying to avoid pitfalls instead of actually trying to achieve some great goal. Because I think we find that they fall short of the goal. Lizzy, what is it that we are searching for with Pirates movies? Because I think we nail it later on. But I think with this, I like the idea of swashbuckling. We have a little bit of that in here, right?
Yeah, I think so. Going back to Captain Jack Sparrow, I didn't even realize that the correlation that I was making by picking a pirate beard for a pirate movie.
Yeah.
So that worked out perfectly. But I would say looking at the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, because to me, at least from my experience, those are probably the most like mainstream popular pirate movies. And I think what makes Captain Jack Sparrow work, he's not particularly a great guy either, but he's charismatic. He's fun to watch. He is like funny and quippy, but also at the end of the day, he has a code of conduct, and it might not be necessarily an honorable one.
Right.
But he does have a code that he lives by. And I think that whenever you're taking somebody that is kind of a questionable character, we want to put people in these archetypes so badly. We want everybody to either be your protagonist or your antagonist. And a pirate kind of lives somewhere in the middle. They can be your main character, but they're not necessarily going to be a great guy. So I think with those kind of ambiguous characters that are acting as our main ones, I think the key of making it work is giving them some kind of code of conduct that we as the viewer can at the absolute least understand, so that now we have a baseline for understanding his behavior. And I think they tried with Yellowbeard to give him a code of conduct, kind of, like they're towards the end of the movie, they tried really hard.
It would be like a code of misconduct. Like
yes. That's a good way of putting it. Like they tried.
Yeah.
He tried having one. But at the end of the day, I just think it fell flat for me because there was never really an arc for the character. And so because of that, we never got to really see or get to know him beyond just the antics.
Yeah, it's a real shallow curve.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I get. What I wanted to say about pirates, I'm going to actually add as a button. I do want to ask you, Matt, the character of Yellowbeard himself. Uh, Tell me about what he adds to the movie as being like absolute villain. Don't root for him. It's funny that he's kind of hiding, but it does seem weird that the title of the movie and the focus on him and the people that he has affected, where he's just kind of rough, crude, violent, killer, rapist. These are things that we know about, like historically, like pirates are supposed to be bad guys.
I think that's kind of one of the critical failings of the movie, because we're talking about, like, having like an arc or something. I mean, kind of the only main arc is that kind of Dan trying to decide if he wants to be a pirate or not, and be like his father. But his father sucks.
Yeah.
But we still get that resolution at the end where he goes, yes, I will be a pirate. And it's framed in like a good way. And it's like, what have you shown us in the film that being a pirate like Yellowbeard is good?
Right.
There's like, you would want your audience at the very least to want to aspire or at least admire some of the qualities of said pirate, because the thing about Jack Sparrow is there are some admirable things about him. There are some things that the audience likes about him and can understand why someone may want to be like him or why he is the way he is and derive enjoyment from that. I don't think there's a whole lot of enjoyment to be derived from the character of Yellowbeard. So I like the idea of, maybe making him more of a bumbling idiot, perhaps.
Sure.
But it's a little bit hard with how they present him. He's almost, instead of being this like aspirational figure that the arc conclusion is trying to make it out to be, where Dan wants to aspire to be like his father, throughout the film he's almost just kind of like a force of nature. He's a murdering, raping force of nature that's just there in the background that influences the plot, but isn't really characterized in any way beyond that. There's nothing below the surface.
When you said like bumbling, or maybe there's something that could be a funny quirk about him, you mentioned to me before we recorded that one of your favorite scenes is when he's trying to recall what it is to find the treasure. Is like crawl, stumble, crawl. Stumble.
Yeah, get shot. Right. Yeah, stagger. I did like that. That had a fun absurdity and kind of poking fun at the whole, pirate treasure map trope of, 10 paces west, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so is there anything redeemable about him? And the answer has to be no, but the movie tells you yes. And that Dan and the rest of this kind of merry crew, in getting one over on Commander Clement, the Secret Service guy, who, by the way, we were talking about characters earlier, but I think Eric Idle's performance of a buttoned up rule follower was probably tough for him amongst the group of people he was around. I think his character delivers on what he's supposed to do. His relationship, we did Smokey and the Bandit, and the sheriff's relationship with his son was very much like, this is fun to see. In this case, his little side guy, his lieutenant, whoever it is, brings nothing to the table, so he doesn't get to play with him that much. And he's representing the interests of the royal crown, which doesn't we definitely don't want them to win. So I guess in a way, Commander Clement with the Secret Service is kind of our antagonist. If anybody gets the treasure except for them, then we kind of get zagged at the end that they do show up, and we get hit with the big line like a Yellowbeard is never as dangerous as when he's dead, and this kind of ties it together. A pirate's life for me. But yeah, the idea that there's seemingly no redeeming quality from this Yellowbeard character, a force of nature, is exactly right. We've talked about some of our characters that succeed. There's one other thing I think that succeeds, and I noticed this when me and Brian did Master and Commander. When we're out of Britain, when we're out of the city, I actually think our shots at sea are pretty grand. And like it doesn't seem fair that we're going, well, let's talk about the things that we like, but they're done well. It feels like you're on a ship. Very much so. Lizzy, were there any other aspects that you're like, this really made the atmosphere of this movie felt right?
I agree with you. I think that I love how they did the big pan outs to show like these really big grand shots to show the two different ships. I think that when they did the little battle scene, where they have the cannons like too low and then it gets into the water and then they get too high. I think that I imagine that was probably pretty hard to shoot that scene and have, everybody on the boat looking down with the water splashing. I imagine that those scenes were challenging, especially in the 80s when, special effects weren't anywhere near what they are today. So I think, I think they did a really good job with that. I have no notes in terms of that. And I also think that with satires, camp is your friend. I think that there's always like that kind of cheesy element to your atmosphere, I think only yields itself to the comedy. So I don't think anyone's necessarily asking for like James Cameron Titanic level ship scenes and things like that. But I think for what they had and what they were trying to do, they did a great job.
I would add that I know that there was special music written for this movie, but in general, the score and how it is adapted, I'm going to say 10 to 12 different ways throughout this movie, was actually a massive success. And it would feel so right if it was followed with an Inigo Montoya versus the masked man saber fight on top of a cliff. We do get a little bit of staging, blocking, and sword fighting. It just, hey, Men in Tights could do it. Hot Shots could do it. Austin Powers could do it. But like, I just feel like we had it, but it wasn't much of a satisfying meal.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of one of the struggles that this film has with its identity, where it's like, okay, it's a pirate movie. We have to have some swashbuckling. Let's check that box there.
Yeah.
Where if they had leaned into it a little bit more, it would have been a bit more satisfying or given the viewer at least something more to enjoy out of the film.
Mm-hmm. But we made it, we made it to the treasure. We have a resolution that makes sense, even if the writing sometimes doesn't get you there as seamlessly as it could have. I thought there were some things about the way that the plot developed that were, I would say it makes sense, but it would almost be like incorrect. Even though I watched it 1.5 times, I still wasn't exactly sure how we got from looking for a ship to being conscripted onto a ship, like working hard on the deck. And it was okay that it was jarring because I was trying to focus on the humor. But in the end, we are presented with so many great movies that really succeed at that's when you start noticing like, that was really difficult to get from one space to the next. Matt, just because you grew up with this movie and because you were the one that introduced it, was there anything else that when you think about this, that let's just say if you're going to pitch this to another friend, the same way that your friend said, I need you to watch Dune 2 with me, is there something about Yellowbeard that you're like, oh yeah, you know what? Let me put you in mind of a movie with X. What is that X with Yellowbeard?
Ooh, I think that X and kind of how I was kind of pitching it to you was because of the cast. It's Marty Feldman's final film. It has Madeline Kahn. It has all these big names where it's just like there are bits and pieces and maybe flashes of more popular works that these actors have been in that show up in this film. There are certain scenes that feel like Monty Python skits. The dialogue is that subtle, dry British humor that you could enjoy in a lot of other things.
Yeah.
You can kind of only enjoy this film or derive enjoyment from it in the context of the actors and understanding their other works and
that's
the characters they've played.
I think that's a good point. Lizzy, would you think the same thing, that it's like you're looking at people that you know their work and this is adjacent to what they do, and so that's where the fun can come from, is that like this puts me in mind of better times I've had?
Yeah, I mean, I think a great example is would be the movie. I know that it's like a retro movie inside joke, but is the movie Valentine's Day. I know that most people hate that movie, and it's not a good movie. Like that movie is not an enjoyable movie, but it has such a fun cast, and you love, or at least I love, a lot of those cast members. So for me, if nostalgia is very powerful. So to me, I think if you take a lot of the actors and actresses that you love and put them in a room together, even if it's terrible, the saving grace is that you're going to be watching people that you really respect. So I totally agree that especially if you have somebody that is a fan of this particular genre and has watched like the Spaceballs and all of these types of movies, it's almost like, to name drop one other movie, if I may, it's almost a little bit like talking to a movie buff and asking them whether or not they've seen My Dinner with Andre, which is another Retro Movie Roundtable movie that we've covered. It's almost like you may or may not feel like it's 2 hours that you're never going to get back. But it's like, if you really want to call yourself a fan, like, you have to have it in your catalog of movies that you've seen. So you should just watch it, just put it in your back pocket to say you have.
I think that hits the nail on the head. Yeah, where it's like, oh, you love Young Frankenstein. Oh, you love Spaceballs. Oh, you love all of these. Yeah. I'm glad you brought up Spaceballs. That was probably my second most rented movie of all time as a child.
Very good. Yes.
Of those genres of Mel Brooks films, Spaceballs was my most watched. Yeah, it's definitely one of those, okay, if you consider yourself a fan of this type of comedy, if you consider yourself a fan of these actors in this era of filmmaking, then you gotta at least watch it once. You may be disappointed, but the enjoyment comes from...
There's almost a completionist aspect of it.
A little bit, yeah. And I think probably in why my dad holds it in, I want to say reverence. I think he would also say, it's not one of the best. And I think that's probably why I saw it last out of all of that slew of films, and only when I finally kind of like pressed the issue, is because his undying reverence for Madeline Kahn and for Marty Feldman. And when you tell someone who is a fan of Marty Feldman, you go, "It was his last film. He actually died in the middle of filming it." It does pique the interest, I think, a little bit.
Yeah. It also makes me think that if you were to say, like, you're a Holy Grail fan, you said, who's your favorite character? I don't know how many people are going to say King Arthur, because there's so many other wacky characters and more quotable things than King Arthur. And in this sense, the same actor, Graham Chapman, is playing the complete opposite of the straight man. He is the constant force of nature, but he's just destructive. But I will remember from this movie, and it's not even what I picked as a favorite quote, but he's been in prison for 20 years, and he gets beat on the back with a stick. Like, well, what do you want? It's your visit. You got a visitor. So he goes to the iron bars, and he looks at his wife. You again? What do you want? And she says, "What do you mean? It's been 15 years. Yeah, get on with it." Like that is on its own. That's very funny.
Yeah. The opening prison scene does set you up where you're kind of like, okay, like, this is going somewhere good. There's a lot of good jokes in it. I love his kind of getting into that King Arthur, Monty Python, him griping about it's like, oh, all these prisoners nowadays, like they die, it's like they break their leg, they get sad. It's like they're dying all the time. It's like, you won't catch me dying. They'll have to kill me before
kill me first.
Yeah, like that kind of level where it starts setting you up with this great dynamic. You get Marty Feldman almost right from the get-go doing his good character work.
When he puts an inflection on his voice, it helps.
And it does give you that kind of nostalgic, like, oh, okay, awesome. Like, this is giving me elements of things that I've seen that I've liked before. Does it go downhill from there? Yeah.
Well, speaking of going downhill, I want to talk more about this movie, and I want to do it in our superlative section. Lizzy, you ready?
I'm ready. Yeah, let's do it.
Are you ready for superlatives here?
I'm ready.
Well, we're going to start with our first superlative here. Matt, who is the MVP of Yellowbeard?
Madeline Kahn.
She's good. She's great.
Phenomenal.
We sung her praises quite a bit. Lizzy, who's your MVP?
I did a double, and I did Cheech and Chong collectively. I think that
the MVP of the movie are Nebuloso and El Segundo. Which, by the way,
all I know is that I had the biggest smile while watching them on the screen. So I that it's got to go to them. I think they were a little bit of a silly saving grace.
Yeah, speaking of silliness, did you like El Nebuloso's like spitting accent? Like
I loved it. I loved his big over the top lisp. I loved it.
Yeah. I went with Graham Chapman as the writer. And I mean that in the sense that I don't think he knocked it out of the park as far as getting from A to B to Y to Z. But I think that this style and what it's trying to emulate is what would have someone introduce it to someone else. So it's the style that he brought to it. Success notwithstanding, that's why this movie was worth the watch. So Graham Chapman there.
Yeah. And just kind of as a side note, when we're talking about the writing, we kind of didn't address it earlier, but this movie was rife with production issues throughout it that I think negatively impacted it. It went through 3 or 4 script rewrites. They struggled a lot with funding, which then brought in kind of the Hollywood influence, which affected the casting and the direction of the humor that they wanted to go for. I'm not trying to bring these things up to redeem the movie in any way.
Right.
But I think it is an important context of why this movie failed. He very famously in an interview was kind of talking about how all of his editorial choices were just completely disregarded.
We've had that before.
The directions of where they wanted to go with the humor, their whole wanting to not make it too British humor and wanted to make it more appealing to American humor and American audiences, brought in some of the more questionable casting choices. And I think kind of the directions with the almost completely redundant, forgettable physical comedy bits, which plagued the first part of the movie.
It's a story we've heard before, where production and problems with it seep into our final result. Generally, what we find is that turns a 5-star movie to a 4.5 or a 4.5 to a 4. In this one, one of the things I did at least learn is that a lot of these people were pretty vocal about not enjoying what the final product was, but really enjoying the process of working together with their friends. And that's the one kind of ship that can never, ever sink, Lizzy. A friendship.
All right, thank you. Good night.
Yeah.
No, just kidding. Yeah.
Okay. So, who's your best supporting there, Matt?
Mine was actually kind of a toss-up between Eric Idle and Marty Feldman. Partially to give Marty Feldman his flowers, but he also, I think, just was a great part of every scene that he was involved in.
Yeah.
And then I really liked Eric Idle's kind of straight man. He had, I think, some of the most fun small throwaway little lines that are in there. I really enjoyed both of their performances so much.
I'll second the Eric Idle as Clement because I do feel like he fits in the straight man role. Lizzy, who's your best?
I went with John Cleese for Blind Pew. I think he did so great, particularly in the scene with the commander. Like he had the little coin that he would throw in and then pull it right back out. Just kind of like a funny shtick that they would give. But he wasn't on screen for very long. I had imagined that he was going to play a bigger role, but I think for the short time that he was on, I think he had a big impact. So I had to go with John Cleese.
If he somehow lasts throughout the whole movie and is potentially involved with getting the treasure as not involved with the other factions, I think we have another fun situation, and it would elevate this movie.
Like maybe he was there, he beat everybody there, and like he's Nebuloso.
Either he's Nebuloso or he's been working for him too. It could be any of these. Yeah. I thought it was a nice little clever thing is that when he's using his auditory powers. They give you a little ringing,
like the
sound.
audio cue for it. Yeah.
And that was fun.
And he did have some of the more quotable lines for the movie. It's like, I know a double when I hear one, or I have an acute hearing.
That one was good.
Them going through that, the kind of play on words.
Yeah, let no one say that the individual jokes don't hit from time to time here. So, what is your hidden gem for this movie, Matt?
James Mason. He's only very briefly part of it, but I like every line that he has kind of throughout it. He gives us some of the lines that were
strict captain.
He's the strict captain who's mutinied against. And his whole, the dumb lines that he throws, nail that man's foot to the deck. Like his very just dry mercenary portrayal of that, of saying funny things in a very serious tone and to be taken seriously, I liked a whole lot.
Yeah. What about you, Lizzy? Hidden gem?
I went with David Bowie as the shark. I didn't recognize him in the moment, so like I won't give myself that much credit. But when I was going back, and I recognized his voice as somebody that I knew, but never would have even clocked that it was David Bowie. But I also equally loved the scene where she's like, I'm ready to confess. I've had a bad interaction with a shark, and then he turns his back and has the shark fin. I thought that was kind of cute.
That's
I thought that was
my favorite scenes of the film. It has some of the funnier conceits where it's like we'll
that
send
was
it by
funny.
pigeon, and then lifts up the plate. It had a lot of those good.
They needed more of that. To me, it was like
100%.
they had nuggets, but to me, like those were the little pieces of the movie that like really made it like watchable for me. But I thought that was really cute.
Absolutely.
And they happen around Clement playing straight man. It's like they have this available to them. Behind you, I know where you are. No, that's where the ship is. He turns around, knocks him in the that you're not too good for that. And we've noticed that over the last 40 years. Nobody's too good for that. We like that. My hidden gem is it's about the very final scene when they bust in through the windows. Did you notice, Lizzy, that Graham Chapman, that Yellowbeard was like on fire?
Yes, and he had like little things coming out of his beard. I didn't know what they were.
They were fuses. This is a historical nod to accounts of the actual Blackbeard, who would, when he was boarding a ship, or when people were trying to kill him, one of the tactics he would do is he'd put fuses all up in his hair and beard and light them to where he appeared to be some kind of devil or demon fighting through people on the deck. And I thought to myself, if anything, somebody did a little bit of research.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's impressive. Okay.
One of maybe the few grounding referential parts of the movie.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, and kind of what I brought up earlier, a lot of what made the other Monty Python films successful was because, Robin Hood Men in Tights, they were riffing off of a story that we know. This movie was just trying to riff off of history. And I just don't think that hits very well when it comes to trying to make satire of something.
Yeah. Okay. Recast here. You have to do it. Somebody in this movie, you got to choose. Insert another actor there. Who are you choosing, Matt?
They should have had Sting as Dan. I think they should have gone with that. It was right. This was a year before he was in Dune. It's just like, let's just ride that Sting train all night long.
Yeah. Which is something that I guess now it has been a dozen times that we have said we want to ride the Sting train. Lizzy, what's your recast option here?
I went with Dan as well. I wanted Cary Elwes. I think he would have.
Oh my God, yeah.
He would have been charming, and I love him in everything. Like it doesn't matter if he's in Saw or in Princess Bride or he's Robin Hood. Like I love him. And I think he actually would have done a really good job of bringing a little bit more personality to Dan.
Given us a main character that we actually cared about.
Right.
Yeah. It would have been nice to care about that. I think the only role I've ever thought about him that I don't think you're supposed to like is he's the stepdad in Liar Liar.
Oh, I know. He tries so hard to do the claw.
Yeah, you're scared of the claw.
Yeah.
For me, I I didn't know what I really wanted. At first, I thought about having Mr. Crisp changed to somebody. I thought it was strange in retrospect, thinking about how Peter Boyle has more of an impact with essentially 0 lines in Young Frankenstein as Frankenstein's monster than he does here as Mr. Moon, as Bosun Moon. I think he's underutilized extremely. So I thought about, well, who would I want to put in? And I actually ended up not going with Bosun Moon. I ended up going with Blind Pew. I thought it'd be fun to have Rowan Atkinson be Blind Pew, Mr. Bean. I thought having
he would do a good job.
It's more of a pivot away because the Blind Pew we see is a lot more capable.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we put in a more effective, but through bumbling means, Blind.
Yeah, I think we think to ourselves as we've been talking that, like, can this movie be sillier and move swing hard away from highbrow? And if that's what you want, Mr. Bean's there for you.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, what was your best shot of this movie?
I think when they are arriving at the titular island and you get those big kind of overhead shots of the beauty of the island
of the beach,
and everything.
You see the water crashing,
which, I imagine that's where a lot of the budget went. And they were like, we got to make sure we have these beautiful shots of these locations that we're shooting at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think those were just kind of the more beautiful shots of the film.
Yeah, that's a good point. Shot in Mexico, those scenes mostly. Lizzy, what's your best shot?
I mentioned it a little bit already, but I really enjoyed the battle scene between the two factions. I think that like watching the cannons go up, or particularly there's just like one shot where the cannons have all been launched and they're too low, so it's splashing into the water, but you have all like the pirates, like Yellowbeard and his gang, they're just kind of watching in awe of like, are they trying to hit us? And kind of getting this look on their face. And I thought that was silly and an impressive shot to get, especially given the time.
Yeah, there's some stuff about like the artistic quality of battle scenes, and so even a movie like this, while swashbuckling wasn't great, and hey, we got it, and we got ship to ship combat, and that's kind of neat. For me, the best shot was Yellowbeard's face during the visiting session with Madeline Kahn. It shows you how exasperated he can get with the world not being as evil as him. And I paused it in my 1.5 viewings. I paused it after every joke, and his wide eyes and his like angry clenched jaw made me laugh every time. That there's a certain aspect of this menacing guy having giant bushy hair. Just was funny. He kind of looked like a Muppet.
Yeah, he was. I was about to say very Muppet-like.
Very Muppet-like. Yeah. All right, Matt. What is your best scene for this movie?
The interrogation or post-interrogation of Madeline Kahn. It was between that and the toss-up of all of the crewmates coming aboard and trying to sneak various things aboard the vessel,
which we didn't mention.
Which felt very that felt very classic Monty Python of the whole exchange of like, well, we kind of pooled together, being able to bring a pet, and it's just like, well, that's bigger than 3 parrots, and it's like, well, not in their cages. It had that kind of tongue-in-cheek absurdity to it that I think harkens to a Monty Python skit,
and it kind of goes back to everybody trying to outsmart someone else.
Yeah,
which is like even these sailors are trying to outsmart their commanding officer. Even Mr. Crisp is trying to outsmart his commanding officer, and he's one of his own guys. Like, who's that with you carrying the box? Oh, that's Cabin Boy Smith.
It's like Cabin Boy, yeah.
Like, well, he's been feeling a little ill. Get her off of here.
Yeah. While he at the same time just very openly has Mr. Prostitute as a ship officer.
That made me laugh. Yes,
that is that's maybe a nice little hidden gem of just having.
Yeah. That's good stuff. What is your best scene, Lizzy?
I'm so glad that we actually haven't covered this yet. My favorite scene was when they're at the island And now the pirates are ambushing in Nebuloso and
El Segundo.
So they've come up with this plan of like, what we're going to do is we're just going to make it seem like everybody's really falling victim to the attack. And then we're going to turn around and like catch them off guard. And at that point, so like everybody put on a really great performance. And so like when they walk in, like they're shooting like in the completely wrong direction. People just fall. And I thought that part was really funny. And then it gets to the point where like somebody actually ends up losing a leg. And you're like, I said no overacting, everybody.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I thought that was really funny. To me, that was probably like hands down the funniest scene of the movie.
Oh, for sure. I think that's a top 5 scene for sure, especially, you know, the entire time El Segundo is critiquing everyone as they're coming up and being like, what about this? And it's like, stop being so hacky, you know, and then it gives us the perfect comedic resolution of him having a very hacky actual death at the end and everyone else.
Everybody applauding.
Yeah, that was my favorite scene too. I thought that was the best.
Oh, nice.
The defenders pretending to be dead and then like kind of peeking around and looking like, are we doing a good enough job? And it does kind of solve a plot hole, which is how would these hapless heroes get through these fighting men? And it's only if they let them through, to quote unquote let the leader come. Like it just kind of, it's strange enough to say in a movie that we kind of consider a mess, like, yeah, but they covered that. They covered that plot hole. And I thought that made sense. All right, Matt, what's the best wardrobe or makeup moment in this movie?
I think best wardrobe goes to Blind Pew.
Blind Pew.
I thought it's iconic in the sense that it stands out, but feels period appropriate. And really helps inform the character.
And he got the memo. Sometimes all you need is a Holocaust cloak. And he's just imposing. And he even describes himself as like a man with like tall stature. And like he's menacing too. A cool character. Lizzy, what's your best wardrobe or makeup moment?
I did Nebuloso's crown. Just was so over the top. Like just like this gigantic serpent, I think it was. And made out of gold. And it just made me laugh. I felt like it was just like the second that I saw, because like I said, I didn't put 2 and 2 together initially, that was like, that those were our characters from the very beginning. And so it was just made me laugh of being like, oh my gosh, like who are we about to meet? Like what's happening right now?
About 10 minutes before we recorded, I said to Matt, like, man, what is my best wardrobe moment? Because a lot of the stuff is period specific and accurate. Like, it looks pretty good. And I was thinking about the hat as well, that crazy hat, as whatever role he's in as his most, pugnacious holiness, whatever it is. But what I realized I forgot is Peter Bull playing Queen Anne.
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
Yeah,
that's a great gag.
That is
it
a
really
good.
Is so good.
That she's stupid or drunk or both, played by this horrendous, scowling looking man with heavy makeup and the teeniest little crown on the head. Sure,
that was good.
That's good, right?
I forgot about that. That's really a good one.
She doesn't even know what she's signing. Like when Commander Clement comes in, like it just kind of. The only reason that's happening is because they needed to use Lamburn's manor for like temporary housing. Like that part, they really tried to write a circle around somewhere. How do we get that involved? But it was just that I realized like made me laugh was that over the top of making the Queen look terrible.
It was good.
All right. Now this is going to be tough considering the context of this episode, Matt, but you have to change one thing about this movie. Change one thing to make it better, or change one thing to make the movie more money. What are you going to change about this movie?
I think there's 2 very obvious ones.
You can have 2.
Okay.
It's okay. You can have 2.
One.
Lizzy, don't tell me. I'm giving him 2.
Just cut the rape jokes. Just cut the rape jokes.
Mm-hmm.
They take you out.
They do.
And there's only one that I think is passably funny. In the sense of like, okay, I could see how that might be conceived as humorous.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I found it humorous, but like an argument could at least be somewhat made for it. Other from that, they
do really hit you with like a mental spike, like ugh,
every single time. Yeah. The other from that would just be try to just cut the trying to appeal to American audiences and American humor. I think they just needed to fully commit to one style. So honestly, it's not even a cut that. It's either you go 100% that direction or you go 100% the British Monty Python style. Stop trying to waffle between the two.
Yeah, that's a good point. Lizzy, I gave Matt 2. You can have 2 if you want, but I normally we just prep one thing.
No, I mean I could probably, to be sure, I could probably come up with more than one, but I respectfully, of course, but I think what I would have liked, because I agree with yours. Like, I would also like to see those things change, but for the sake of the fun of the game, I would have liked to, I think it would have been good for Yellowbeard if instead of battling with Moon, if they had reconciled. I think that would have been nice. I think we needed to see some, like, a little glimpse of the humanity inside of Yellowbeard. And also Moon, I mean, I hate to say it because I really do love Peter Boyle, but you kind of touched on this earlier, Dustin. He's a total throwaway character. So I think that it would have been nice to actually give him like some lines and like something to say and kind of like a purpose. So it would have been nice to see them become friends and to see some humanity come out of them.
Some kind of catharsis.
Yeah.
But I almost feel as if there was a commitment to having Yellowbeard be so irredeemable that he's not meant to learn a lesson. Well, I had something written down, and during our discussion of the movie, I actually came up with something new that I really like, which is Yellowbeard is irredeemable, and there's nothing that controls him, and the weird, shoehorning in of like, you betrayed me. You really are my son. Like, is that the closest thing we have to connection? And it just seemed odd to me. But because Madeline Kahn is such a knockout performance, and I think it would be so much better if instead of him steamrolling over the Betty character, I'd love it if the Betty character somehow has a more controlling aspect over him, that she's so large and in charge that Yellowbeard, the most fearsome pirate on the seas, when he goes home to her, is kind of a little sheep.
Yeah, what does
give him some kryptonite a little bit.
Fear his wife.
Yeah. Because we know Landborn fears his wife, or at least is so much so to where the driving force to have him follow Dan to leave is because his wife calls for him. Landborn, you know what? We got to go.
Yeah, it's like, I'm going to go with him. Yeah.
And wife humor is very British.
I like that. Being bad for the sake of being bad is not fun to watch unless you're talking about like Heath Ledger's Joker performance, where it's just like he's just so charismatic in and of itself. But like, we want to see, if you're going to be bad, like, it has to be for a cause, So I agree, like, giving him some kind of relationship with his wife could be a North Star for him in some ways, which would allow us to at least connect with him a little bit.
Yeah. Just, this school marm grabbing the ear to keep you in line. I could see that be really working well with that Betty character. All right, last superlative, Matt. What's the best quote of this movie?
Oh boy, that's kind of a hard one.
Because we know the individual jokes work.
Yes, and I think I've already kind of brought up some of my favorite quotes. But it's gotta be nail that man's foot to the deck. It's such like a jarring, like, there's something about him listing off the lines of officers and the one guy laughing, and he just cuts immediately to that and then keeps going.
And they just keep going.
And I think part of it mainly because that was one of the two main quotes that my parents quoted so much.
I like that.
It has that nostalgic factor to it, where if I was messing around, my dad would jokingly threaten. He's like, "I'll nail your foot to the floor," kind of.
Yeah.
Side note for listeners: my parents are wonderful human beings, and they never harmed me growing up and would never do so. But they did always like to do those over-the-top fun threats that you would throw against someone who you're exasperated against when I was being an unruly child.
Yeah. My dad never nailed me to the floor, but he did accidentally nail his hand to the wall. That wasn't a fun day. Lizzy, what's your best quote?
This might be cheating, but I just went with Yellowbeard's kind of sound that he would just consistently make throughout the movie. It almost felt like he had made that sound more than actual dialogue. And I have to say that even if it was in an unfavorable moment, or with a woman, or if it was a situation where he was fighting, that did kind of break the ice a little bit, was just hearing that ridiculous sound that he was making. So it was so that was at least silly enough to put in my superlatives.
Comes out. Yeah, that makes sense.
I like you saying that, and it brings to mind the image. Another fun context of this movie is it was originally bankrolled by Keith Moon of The Who. Okay. Who was supposed to play Yellowbeard before his health started declining. So now I'm trying to picture Keith Moon making those noises.
The only Keith Moon acting performance I know about is from the rock opera Tommy, where he plays the wicked Uncle Ernie. Yeah, I think that was right before he passed. But yeah, that's interesting. I didn't read that at all. That's interesting insight. Mine is, I thought there were a lot of jokes that hit in this movie, but the one that I thought was really fun was after they were trying to decide what his name should be. Professor Chair, Professor Death, Professor Floor, Professor Anthrax. So they decide on that, and they're all sitting in this room, and Betty walks in, Madeline Kahn walks in and says, "Who's that?" And they all say, "That's Professor Anthrax." She just says, "That's Yellowbeard." And he puts the book down and yells, "I'm in disguise, you stupid tart." I really like that, and I feel like we should call more people
That's pretty funny.
I thought that was good. All right, we made it through all of our superlatives, but we have one last task ahead of us as a group here, which is we need to assign a star rating to this movie. We're on a 5-star scale, the lowest being a half star, reserved for the finest movies like Valentine's Day, the record setter for me, or a 5 being the best movie. So 5-star being the best, half is the worst. Matt, what do you rank this movie?
I'm going to give it a 2.5.
2.5 out of 5.
It had incredible potential, and there are glimmers of what would be an enjoyable experience, but ultimately it just failed to hit its identity and kind of failed to hit the marks of a enjoyable story.
Yeah. It's almost there. We can see that it's almost there.
It's almost there, and then it's just kind of I would give something that is almost there a little bit better of a review if some of the things that took away from it weren't so egregious.
It's a good point. Yeah, that's well put. Lizzy, what's your star rating here?
I think I'm going to give this a 1.5 star. I think the reason for the 1 is just because I genuinely don't see myself ever watching this movie again. And I think I'm a one and done gal with this one. And I think it didn't deliver, I think, on what it really tried to do. But the half star, I'm really giving that additional half because of what you were saying, Matt. I just think it had a lot of potential. I think that it was a movie that really could have gotten there. I think if they had cleaned up the writing a little bit and maybe just kind of stayed on trying to, honestly, it would have been fine if they wanted to make it even a little bit more 2-dimensional, but I think that they couldn't really figure out where they wanted to go with it. And I think, unfortunately, it fell flat.
Yeah. And I think that take of, I will only watch this once and never watch it again, I think that's a completely appropriate reaction to this film. You know, kind of when you were asking how would I like pitch this to someone else, where it's like, yeah, you check it off the box. If you liked all of these other films, you watch it once, it's checked off. You don't really need to watch it again.
Yeah. Now I'm in a weird little boat here on the rollicking seas. Is that I think the closest score I should give is 1.5 to match you, Lizzy. However, there was something about our discussion tonight that because we're almost to what would be a completed idea, there was a puzzle. Lizzy, you've recorded with me a lot. Matt, you've listened to the show. You've been on the show before. I will slither my way through to try to find the things I like and the ways that we can describe a movie, the things about them that are successes. And though I think in the goal of a successful comedy, I think we fail. The goal of a movie that does a lot of the things that would ordinarily be secondary or tertiary, but extremely well, really well done shots on the sea, the approaching this finding the treasure from different angles, incredible star-studded cast. Who, as I mentioned very early, like we have some individual performances that there's not that much of a flaw about, and then the music in total is very, very good. I maybe listeners are getting tired of me having music redeem movies, but I think I'm gonna land at a 2 stars for this movie. I think the puzzle of finding what was fun or what worked with this movie was enough to kind of to scratch an itch in my brain, and I would watch this again. This is something where these characters and this kind of thing is a fun background movie for me, like while I'm cleaning the house, or it's something where if I'm hanging out with somebody that enjoys this, I would want to introduce to them as well. And I think it would come with the disclaimer of, hey, this isn't an all-star, but it is something that's kind of fun. It puts into mind, I think I brought it up before, that Super Troopers ruled. But that doesn't mean Broken Lizard is really knocking out of the park with everything. But it means I'm going to give it a shot. And I think there's people that are in my friend group or people that I would meet that I would say, hey, give Yellowbeard a shot. And so I'm going to settle on 2. And that will cover our wrap-up of this movie. We need to think about next week, Lizzy. Do you have any options for me?
Yes. So we're going to stick in the comedy genre next week, but instead of going in the direction that we have with satire, our common denominator is going to be Steve Martin. So option 1, we have Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid from 1982. Film noir parody with a detective uncovering a sinister plot. Characters from classic noir films appear as scenes from various movies interjected into a story. Option number 2, The Man with Two Brains from 1983. A brain surgeon marries a femme fatale whose life he saved, causing his life to turn upside down. And option number 3, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels from 1988. 2 con men try to settle their rivalry by betting on who can swindle a young American heiress out of $50,000 first.
All 3 I have not seen, Lizzy. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, I think, is the one that it stands out to me the most. And that's what we're going to do from 1988. Nice. Matt, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Your first episode on the show was like a 8-time Oscar winner, extremely heavy drama. And we're going to swing towards Yellowbeard, which I thought was the fairest recommendation. I'm glad you brought it to the show.
Yeah, it was certainly a little bit of a whiplash because it was such a highly regarded movie that I had never seen before. And then we get to go to the other side of it, of a very poorly regarded movie that I've seen probably too many times.
Let's bring you into the dumpster. Let's get dirty.
Same time next year for Muppet Treasure Island.
All right. We're marking it down. That sounds great. A nice summer flick. Lizzy, thank you, of course. And thank you, all of the lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable. We invite you to reach out to us. We want to hear from you. Subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Pandora, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a like on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at @movie_retro. Email us at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com. Producing and providing this podcast is fun but not free. We invite you to support the show at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/Retro Movie Roundtable. Any contribution is much appreciated and will go toward making the show better for you, the listeners. As always, thank you for listening. Be good to each other and watch more movies. Lizzie?
Did you say Abe Lincoln